I've never been one to second-guess Melissa, but something felt off that evening. We were getting ready for the big corporate party, one of those events where every move counts and appearances matter more than truth. As I dressed, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was missing something vital. It all started when I caught her in the hallway, her eyes darting nervously toward her phone as if she was hiding a secret. One moment she was laughing with a friend, and the next, her demeanor shifted. It wasn't just her smile that had faded. It was the way she clutched her purse, her hand trembling ever so slightly when she tucked her phone away. I'd seen nothing like it before. At first, I tried to dismiss it. I told myself that everyone gets anxious sometimes, especially when they're about to step into the limelight at a big party. But then later that night, I noticed her phone light up in the dark, a message coming in that made her glance around as if she expected someone to be watching. The furtive look in her eyes hit me hard. It wasn't the look of a woman who was merely nervous about a public event. It was something else, something secret. I found myself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. Was it just a work-related emergency? Or was there something more personal, more sinister at play? Despite the rising tide of suspicion, I held my tongue. I didn't want to confront her in front of our guests, nor did I want to risk my own reputation by airing our private concerns in a public setting. I spent the rest of the evening grappling with my thoughts, each glance at her making my heart sink a little further. The laughter around me felt distant as my mind raced through every possible scenario. At one point, I even caught myself wondering if I was overreacting. After all, trust had been the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I thought. In that moment, I realized that something had changed between us, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And as the night wore on, the mix of suspicion and dread grew heavier, setting the stage for what I feared might be an unraveling of everything I believed in. The moment we stepped into the party, I felt an icy isolation. The atmosphere was buzzing with light chatter and clinking glasses, but my focus was entirely on Melissa, until she disappeared into a huddle of her colleagues. I watched helplessly as she exchanged smiles and laughter with a group that seemed entirely engrossed in their own world, leaving me standing alone at the edge of the crowd. I felt a twist in my gut, as if some unseen hand had pulled the rug from beneath me. I attempted to approach her, but she was already swept away by the current of friendly banter. It wasn't until I caught sight of her across the room that I realized just how deeply things had shifted. There, in a well-lit corner near the bar, was a tall, striking man with an air of unwavering confidence. His presence seemed to command attention. His name, Nate, was soon to be etched into my mind in the most unwelcome way. Melissa's eyes sparkled in conversation with Nate, and she laughed with an ease that cut through my heart like a knife. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was just mingling, that nothing was amiss. But deep down, every instinct screamed that this wasn't a harmless interaction. I moved closer, wanting to hear what was being said, yet unable to tear my gaze away. Then, as if on cue, Nate turned his attention to her and, in a tone that left no room for ambiguity, declared loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear, "I'm going to dance with you, Melissa. You do not own her." The words hung in the air, heavy with audacity, and I felt my blood run cold. It was as if the declaration had shattered the fragile illusion of my life, exposing a truth I had desperately tried to ignore. I remember feeling a surge of anger mixed with a creeping sense of betrayal. How could he say something so blunt in front of everyone? And more painfully, why did it matter that he spoke those words if Melissa was already drifting away from me? Every instinct told me to march over, confront him, demand an explanation, or at least an apology, but a paralyzing fear of making a scene held me back. Instead, I stood rooted to the spot, the sounds of the party fading into a background hum as my inner turmoil roared to life. I recalled every moment of our recent days together, wondering when the signs had started to accumulate. Was it just the night earlier, the secretive glances and hurried messages on her phone? And now, here was Nate, making a spectacle of his intentions. I felt as if I were watching someone else's life unfold before my eyes, my own reality splintering into a dozen painful shards. My thoughts raced back to our happier days, the late-night talks, the shared dreams, the moments of quiet intimacy. Was all of that merely a facade? Had I been living in a carefully constructed illusion while the truth lurked in the shadows? I questioned every word, every touch, now tainted by the undeniable evidence before me. At one point, I considered leaving the party, disappearing into the night with nothing left to salvage. But curiosity, mingled with a desperate need for answers, anchored me in place. I needed to know why Melissa was so captivated by Nate, why she allowed him to publicly challenge the sanctity of our relationship. Had I lost her long before this night? Or was this a test, a betrayal that was only just beginning? As I lingered near the edge of the dancing crowd, my mind spiraled into dark corners. I wondered if Melissa even realized the impact of her actions. Her laughter, so genuine and free in that moment, masked a deeper conflict that I wasn't privy to. I watched as Nate extended a hand to her, his smile a blend of charm and provocation. The confidence in his eyes made it clear that he wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was here with purpose, and that purpose was to dismantle what I thought I knew about our life together. The party roared on around me, oblivious to the emotional battle unfolding in my chest. Every glance in my direction felt like a reminder of my isolation, of the growing rift between us. I grappled with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. How could a single sentence so effortlessly unravel everything I'd built? And what did it mean for the future that Melissa now seemed so willingly ensnared by this enigmatic man? Time slowed as I watched them dance, a dance that was both literal and metaphorical. Each step they took was a defiant statement against the partnership we once shared, a public declaration of a shift that I wasn't ready to accept. I could feel the eyes of the room on us, the whispers and sideways glances, as if everyone knew a secret that I'd been blind to all along. In that moment, I recognized the painful irony. I'd always prided myself on trusting Melissa implicitly, yet I was now left grappling with a betrayal that cut deeper than any business setback or professional misstep. The words, "You do not own her," echoed relentlessly in my mind, a reminder of how fragile our ties could be when challenged by ambition, desire, or perhaps something far more sinister. I wanted to call out to her, to ask for a private conversation away from the crowd, but my throat felt constricted by both shock and shame. Instead, I retreated further into the shadows of the room, my thoughts a chaotic mix of sorrow, anger, and dread. I wondered if this was the beginning of the end, or merely the first twist in a long, painful journey toward an uncertain future. That night, amidst the swirling lights and relentless music, I realized that sometimes the most devastating betrayals come not with a whispered secret, but with a single, unyielding proclamation that shatters the illusion of forever. The moment Nate's hand brushed against Melissa's back, something inside me snapped. It was as if I'd been standing on the edge of a precipice, and that single, careless touch was the final shove. Before I knew it, my fist collided with Nate's chest. The sound, a muted thud, echoed around the suddenly hushed room, as if the very air had been sucked out of the space. Time seemed to stand still. Conversations died mid-sentence, and all eyes turned toward us. The vibrant buzz of the party transformed into an oppressive silence, broken only by the frantic beating of my heart. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of triumph, a perverse relief that I had finally stood up for myself. But as the adrenaline subsided, a cold, crushing dread began to seep in. Melissa's reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of immediately condemning Nate's brazen behavior, her eyes hardened and an icy anger replaced the confusion that I had anticipated. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice slicing through the silence like a razor. I blinked, trying to process her sudden hostility. I had expected her to rally behind me, to be outraged at Nate for overstepping some unspoken boundary. Instead, she seemed incensed at my actions, as if I had just violated some sacred rule between us. The shock of her anger hit me hard, mingling with the sting of my guilt. I took a step back, my arms still raised, as if caught in the aftermath of a battle I hadn't fully waged. "Melissa, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling between fury and disbelief. He was touching you, and you know damn well that wasn't okay. Her eyes flashed with a bitter mixture of resentment and something I couldn't quite decipher. Don't you dare try to justify yourself, she snapped, stepping forward. The crowd around us seemed to fade into the background as the intensity of our confrontation took center stage. In that charged moment, every whispered comment and every wary glance from our guests felt like an accusation. I could see the conflict in her eyes, a storm of emotions brewing beneath the surface. Then, in a voice filled with a quiet, seething determination, she confessed. It's been going on for 10 months, she said, her tone steadier than I could have imagined given the weight of her words. I've been seeing him behind your back. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. The room, the party, even the silence. It all blurred into insignificance compared to the raw, painful truth that was laid bare before me. For 10 months? The word echoed in my head, each syllable a cruel reminder of every moment I trusted her, every whispered assurance that our love was unshakable. The betrayal wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a prolonged, insidious affair that had been eroding our foundation while I was oblivious. I could feel my vision narrowing, every sound muffled as the realization set in. 10 months, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, each word laced with disbelief and a deep, aching sorrow. How could you do this to us? I demanded, my throat tight with the effort of holding back the torrent of emotions. Melissa's eyes flickered, torn between defiance and regret. I never meant to hurt you, Alex, she murmured, and for a split second, the mask of anger faltered, replaced by a raw vulnerability. But I couldn't keep living a lie. I was suffocating in a relationship that wasn't real for me anymore. Her words, meant to justify the unthinkable, only deepened the chasm between us. I felt the betrayal not just as a personal attack, but as a dismantling of everything I believed in: trust, loyalty, love. The room remained silent, the weight of our confrontation pressing down on every soul present. I saw faces contorted in shock and dismay, whispers of scandal already beginning to circulate among the partygoers. And yet, all I could focus on was the betrayal that was now laid bare, a decade of shared memories collapsing under the burden of her confession. Anger and despair waged war inside me. I struggled to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had deceived me so thoroughly. You made your choice, Melissa, I said, my voice cracking with both fury and heartbreak. And in doing so, you've not only shattered my trust, but our entire future together. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the person I once adored. But it was quickly overtaken by a cold resolve. You always care more about your own needs than about us, she shot back, her tone biting. You never really saw me, not truly. Her words, though harsh, struck a chord deep within me. I felt the sting of betrayal not just from the affair, but from the years of feeling unseen, unappreciated. But there was no room for self-pity now. The dam of my emotions had burst, and a torrent of rage and sorrow overwhelmed me. I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding in a mixture of defiance and despair, as the reality of the past 10 months crashed down around us. The dance of deception, the hidden messages, the cold distance at that earlier corporate party, it all coalesced into this moment of irrevocable truth. I realized that the real explosion wasn't just the physical clash with Nate. It was the shattering of the illusion I had built around our marriage, piece by painful piece. As I looked at Melissa, I saw not just the betrayer, but also the woman who had been struggling with her own demons, her own sense of entrapment in a life that no longer resonated with her. And yet, despite this fleeting glimpse of understanding, I couldn't escape the overwhelming betrayal. What now, Melissa? I asked, voice low and ragged. After everything, how do we go on from here? Her silence, heavy with regret and resignation, was the final punctuation to a chapter of our lives that I never imagined could end so violently, so irrevocably. In that moment, the man I once trusted was reduced to a mere shadow of betrayal and broken promises, leaving me to confront a future that was now as uncertain as it was painful. I left the party with numb determination, stepping out into the cold night air as if it might wash away the bitterness seeping into my bones. My head was a whirlwind of shattered trust and unanswered questions, but one thought nagged at me relentlessly. Melissa's infidelity felt far more complex than I had first believed. Something about the way she had confessed. It was too tidy, too rehearsed, almost as if she were protecting a secret that ran deeper than a fleeting betrayal. I returned home in a haze, my mind looping through every conversation, every subtle gesture that I'd ignored before. Alone in our quiet apartment, the silence was deafening. I needed to find the truth, to piece together the puzzle that my life had suddenly become. I sat down at our shared computer, the screen glowing in the darkness as I hesitantly logged into our cloud storage, a repository of memories, documents, and our intertwined digital lives. I had always trusted Melissa with everything, even our private files, assuming that nothing in there could ever hint at the secret she held. But as I began to sift through folders and files, my heart pounded with a growing dread. There were innocuous documents, financial records, and shared photos from happier times, yet hidden among them, I discovered a folder labeled with dates and innocuous titles that I had never noticed before. My hands trembled as I clicked through each document and email chain, unfolding a narrative that was both meticulous and horrifying. At first, I thought I was simply reading between the lines, an affair that had stretched out longer than the 10 months Melissa had admitted to. But as I scrolled further, the evidence was undeniable. Detailed exchanges, photos, and even flight itineraries that mapped out clandestine meetings. The emails weren't vague or sporadic. They were continuous, spanning over 2 years. 2 years of deception, meticulously documented as if she had been writing a diary of betrayal. Every carefully chosen word, every cryptic note, revealed a relationship that was far more elaborate than I had ever imagined. I felt a mix of revulsion and disbelief. The evidence showed that Melissa's affair with Nate wasn't a desperate lapse in judgment or a momentary escape. It was a long-term, calculated betrayal. 2 years. I sank back in my chair, my mind racing as I replayed memories that now seemed tainted. Every whispered secret, every late night she'd spent away from home, every unexplained absence, all of it pointed to this sustained deception. My heart ached with the realization that I had been living a lie, a life built on trust that had been so thoroughly undermined. The room around me blurred, and the cold click of the keyboard was the only sound that anchored me to reality. I began to wonder how deeply this betrayal had penetrated every facet of our lives. Had she been planning it from the very start? Was Nate just a convenient distraction, or did he share a part in a conspiracy to dismantle our life together? The more I uncovered, the more my mind whirled with questions that had no easy answers. I scrolled through the documents repeatedly, trying to piece together a timeline. Each entry in the digital ledger was a blow, a confirmation that nothing about our marriage was as it seemed. I recalled the conversation at the party, Melissa's calculated anger, her defiant words, now taking on a new, darker meaning. It wasn't just anger at being caught. It was the anger of someone who had been living 2 lives, of someone who had long since resigned herself to a role that I never even knew existed. I felt betrayed, not just by the act of infidelity, but by the erosion of every shared secret, every moment I had taken for granted. The cloud storage, once a symbol of our intertwined trust, now became the archive of my deepest wounds. I wondered how many times I had brushed off her late nights and unexplained absences as mere coincidences. Now, those moments piled up like evidence in a cold case, each one a stark reminder that our reality was built on a foundation of lies. In that dim light, I was forced to confront the ugly truth. The betrayal was not a temporary mistake, but a deliberate, long-term affair that had been meticulously maintained. The evidence was overwhelming, painting a picture of a relationship that had been carefully hidden away from my view for far too long. I sat there in silence, the weight of every revelation crushing me, wondering how I could have been so blind, so utterly deceived. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Melissa and Nate. It was about a life that I had known, a future that I had believed in, now slipping away with every documented lie. The digital files didn't lie. They were a testament to a betrayal that spanned years. Each line of text a confirmation of the slow, deliberate dismantling of everything I thought I had. As I closed the final document, a cold emptiness settled in. I was left alone with the horrifying truth. The betrayal was not an impulsive lapse, but a meticulously maintained secret affair spanning over 2 years. The shock of it all left me paralyzed, and I realized that moving forward would mean confronting not just the betrayal, but the painful process of unraveling the life we had built together. I couldn't let the night end there. The weight of Melissa's confession and the damning evidence of a 2-year affair had shattered everything. But as I sat in the dim light of our now sterile home office, a furious thought began to crystallize. Melissa had played me, and worse, she had manipulated Nate too. I couldn't believe it until I saw it for myself. A twist I never saw coming. With a resolve born of betrayal and righteous indignation, I decided to return to the party and expose the final act of her deception. I strode back into the hall, feeling the eyes of the remaining guests, those who had stayed behind, on me. Their whispers died down as I cut through the lingering tension, fueled by the newfound evidence stored in my trembling hands. I had dug even deeper into our shared cloud storage, and what I discovered next made my blood run cold. Not only had Melissa deceived me and ensnared Nate in a calculated affair, but she had also been cheating on him. The documents, emails, and screenshots detailed an illicit liaison with yet another party, all orchestrated with the same cold precision as her affair with Nate. It was a web of lies that extended far beyond what I had imagined. A tangled, heartless network where every relationship was a pawn in her twisted game. In the center of the room, Nate was engaged in a conversation with a couple of his colleagues, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I approached him cautiously, my mind racing with the absurdity of it all. Nate had always seemed so self-assured, so convinced of his own magnetism. But now I saw that he was just as much a victim of Melissa's manipulation as I was. I pulled him aside, speaking in a low, urgent tone that barely masked the anger boiling within me. "Nate, I need to show you something," I said, handing him my phone. He hesitated only a moment before his eyes widened in disbelief as he scrolled through the damning evidence. Emails time-stamped over the past 2 years, detailed exchanges that proved Melissa had been juggling more than one secret affair. You cheated on me?" Nate stuttered, his voice a mix of shock and betrayal. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave. His confident demeanor crumbled as he realized that Melissa, the woman he had believed was the center of his world for a few fleeting months, had been lying to him too. "I thought I was special," he muttered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "But I was just another plaything in her game." The room, once a cacophony of clinking glasses and chatter, seemed to pause in collective disbelief. Nate's colleagues gathered around, eyes wide, murmuring among themselves as the truth spread like wildfire. And then, in an almost surreal moment, all attention turned to Melissa. I watched as she appeared from the shadows near the bar, her face a mask of composed denial that quickly melted into panic. Her eyes darted from Nate to me, and I could see the meticulously crafted facade begin to crumble. "Melissa," I called out, my voice echoing in the hushed space. "It's over." I stepped forward, holding up the phone as evidence, a digital testament to her betrayals laid bare for everyone to see. The evidence was irrefutable, and as Nate's expression hardened into one of grim realization, the plan she'd so carefully constructed disintegrated before our eyes. For a moment, time seemed to freeze as the shock reverberated through the room. Nate, still reeling from the truth, turned to face her with a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. "How could you?" he demanded, the hurt in his voice unmistakable. "I trusted you, and you used me." His voice, usually so measured and confident, now trembled with the weight of betrayal. Melissa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, the silence was punctuated by the sound of her stuttering breaths and the heavy, echoing thud of her collapsing plans. The once bustling party was now a stage for her public undoing. The elaborate tapestry of lies she had woven unraveled thread by thread before an audience of stunned onlookers. In that fleeting, charged moment, I felt a vindication that was both bitter and sweet. I had been crushed, and now, by exposing her latest deceit, I was reclaiming some small measure of control. The tables had turned. Melissa, who had once manipulated our lives with such calculated precision, was now left isolated, alone and stripped of her power. The facade of glamour and control evaporated as quickly as it had been built. I could sense Nate's anguish, a mirror of my own shattered trust, and yet it was clear that this revelation was a turning point for him too. We exchanged a look of mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement that we were now united in our shared betrayal, though our pain came from different sources. The room, heavy with the shock of betrayal, bore witness to the collapse of a carefully orchestrated charade. As I looked around at the faces in the crowd, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few openly hostile, I realized that Melissa's empire of lies had crumbled in mere minutes. In that quiet aftermath, she stood alone, an isolated figure stripped of the manipulations and secrets that had once bound her to us all. Her eyes, once full of calculated mischief and confidence, now shimmered with the raw vulnerability of a person who had lost everything. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline begin to subside, replaced by a heavy, resolute calm. The truth was out, and while the path ahead was shrouded in pain and uncertainty, there was no longer any hiding in the shadows of deceit. Tonight, in the glare of exposed secrets, justice had been served in its own small way, one betrayal at a time. The aftermath of that shattering night left a raw emptiness that quickly turned into a burning desire for retribution. I couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa's twisted control had poisoned every corner of our lives, and I wasn't the only one left in ruins. In the weeks that followed, Nate and I found ourselves bound by a shared wound, a betrayal that ran deep. Our first encounter after that fateful evening was laden with a mutual, unspoken understanding. We both knew that Melissa had to pay for the wreckage she'd wrought, not only on our hearts, but on the very fabric of our social and professional lives. One rainy evening, we met at a quiet, dimly lit bar far from the glaring lights of our usual haunts. As I sipped my drink, Nate leaned in and said, "Alex, it's time we take back control." She thought she was untouchable, that she could manipulate and destroy us all. But now, we have the evidence, and the world will soon see her for who she really is. His voice, steady and resolute, carried an intensity that resonated with my own need for justice. I nodded, feeling the weight of our unspoken pact solidified between us. We began our counteroffensive by meticulously gathering every shred of evidence we'd ever seen. Emails, text messages, internal memos, and even recordings from those secret meetings she'd orchestrated with unassuming colleagues. The plan was as clear as it was ruthless. We would expose her duplicity to everyone who once trusted her, turning her polished reputation into a shattered relic of deceit. Our strategy was simple: dismantle every relationship she'd built, every alliance that lent her an aura of invincibility, until she was left utterly alone. Nate had his own ways of navigating corporate circles, and I leveraged my personal connections from the party and beyond. We began by contacting those who had been unwittingly drawn into her web: former colleagues, friends, and even a few influential figures in the business community. Slowly but surely, we painted a picture of a woman who was not only unfaithful in the confines of a personal relationship, but also treacherously manipulative in the professional realm. We arranged discreet meetings, shared the indisputable evidence we'd unearthed, and watched as the narrative began to shift. The backlash was swift and brutal. Social media buzzed with shock and outrage as details of her long-term deception exploded across online platforms. Memes, heated comments, and even news outlets picked up the story. I remember sitting in my small apartment late one night, staring at my phone as notification after notification confirmed that the public was turning against her. Every new post, every retweet of the scandal, was a nail in the coffin of the carefully curated image she had maintained for so long. What was most satisfying, though, was watching her spiraling descent from a once powerful figure to someone shunned by those she once controlled. Invitations to events were rescinded. Board members distanced themselves. Friends who had once admired her now avoided her calls and messages. In corporate meetings, she was no longer the commanding presence she had prided herself on, but a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry. The woman who had thought she could manipulate every situation to her benefit was now trapped in a snare of her own making. Nate and I would often catch up in quiet moments after our coordinated strikes, sharing a grim smile as we recounted the latest developments. It wasn't about vindictiveness alone. It was about reclaiming a sense of dignity that had been eroded by her lies. Every whispered confession from a former confidant, every shocked gasp from a once adoring admirer, was a small victory in our relentless crusade. One afternoon, I received an anonymous tip, a recording of a confidential conversation between Melissa and a high-ranking executive. The discussion revealed not only her unethical tactics to secure business deals, but also her casual indifference to the collateral damage she left behind. With that final piece of damning evidence in hand, Nate and I coordinated a live press conference with an independent journalist known for uncovering corporate scandals. The event was a masterstroke, a public unmasking of a woman who had built her empire on deceit and manipulation. As the journalist played the recording, the room filled with murmurs of disbelief. Melissa's face, once so confident and untouchable, was now a mask of shock and despair. The evidence was irrefutable. Within minutes, the facade she had so meticulously maintained crumbled entirely. No longer could she hide behind corporate power or social influence. The very network she had depended on for protection now turned its back on her. Her reputation was obliterated, and with it, every advantage she had ever wielded. I watched the scene unfold from a safe distance, a mix of satisfaction and sorrow mingling in my chest. There was no joy in seeing someone suffer, but justice, raw and unfiltered, had been served. Nate, whose own pain had fueled our alliance, met my gaze with a look that said, "We did what needed to be done." In that moment, our shared victory was bittersweet. The cost of betrayal was steep, and the aftermath left scars that would never truly fade. Melissa, once the orchestrator of her own empire, now found herself cornered and utterly isolated. The twisted plans she had so carefully laid out were now the very tools of her undoing. Trapped by her own machinations, she was left with nothing, no allies, no power, no refuge. The downfall was complete, a harsh reminder that truth, no matter how long it is buried, will eventually claw its way to the surface. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds as I sat with a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the chaos of the previous night. The world outside seemed unperturbed, a stark contrast to the storm that had upended my life. I was still processing the fallout, a mixture of sorrow, anger, and a newfound resolve that had slowly transformed me from a betrayed husband into someone in control of his destiny. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. My pulse quickened, not with dread but with a cold, measured curiosity. I opened the door and found Melissa standing there, her once pristine appearance now disheveled and marred by desperation. Her eyes darted nervously, a far cry from the confident glimmer they once held. "Alex, please," she began, her voice trembling. I need to talk to you. I was hoping we could maybe start over." I hesitated only a moment before stepping aside to let her in. As she crossed the threshold, every step seemed weighted with the guilt and panic of someone whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling. I watched her closely as she entered the living room, where the remnants of last night's chaos still lingered like ghosts in the corners. We settled in the quiet of the living room, a silence stretching between us that was filled with unspoken words and memories of betrayal. I studied her face, the eyes that once radiated mischief and allure now appeared haunted by regret and fear. With a steady calm that surprised even myself, I said, "Melissa, it's been a long night for both of us, hasn't it?" She shifted uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands as if searching for an escape. "Alex, I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I can explain everything. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I let a small, bitter smile play on my lips. "Explain, huh?" I replied coolly. "Explain how the woman I trusted for years could orchestrate an empire of lies, not just betraying me, but deceiving Nate as well. Explain how you managed to juggle two separate lives, keeping your secrets so well hidden until everything came crashing down." Her eyes widened as if expecting me to lose control, to start pleading like the victim I once was. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had spent the last few weeks transforming my anguish into resolve, gathering every piece of evidence, every document that traced the elaborate map of her deceit. And now, it was all mine, a weapon, not for vengeance alone, but for the reclamation of my dignity. "Melissa," I said softly, my voice steady yet laced with an edge of finality. "I've learned so much in the past few weeks. About us, about trust, and about the lengths you're willing to go to protect your own interests. You once believed you could control everything and everyone around you. But you underestimated one thing. The truth always finds a way to come out." I paused, letting my words sink in. Her eyes flickered, a mixture of fear and pleading regret swirling within them. I continued, "I invited you here today, not out of some misplaced hope that we could go back to how things were, but because I need you to see what you've done, to understand that there's no turning back from here." I rose from my seat and led her into my study, a small room that had become the repository of our shared past, and, more recently, the vault of her misdeeds. There on my desk lay a neatly organized file. Each page, each digital printout, was a chapter in the story of your betrayal. I could see her eyes widen in disbelief as she recognized the implications of what lay before her. "Look at this," I said, opening the file and letting the evidence spill forth in a quiet, deliberate monologue. Emails, texts, bank statements, flight itineraries, every detail that maps out the life you chose to live behind my back. Not only did you deceive me for over 2 years, but you managed to manipulate someone else, too. You thought you were untouchable, that your lies were your shield. But now, every secret, every carefully hidden affair, is laid out for all to see. Her breath hitched as she fumbled for words. "Alex, I can explain. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. I never wanted this to end like this." I fixed her with a level gaze. "Explain? How do you explain betraying the man who loved you? How do you explain using people like pawns in your little game? I trusted you, Melissa, and you repaid that trust with a string of lies. I'm not here to relive the pain of being the victim. I'm here to show you that the game is over. You're no longer the puppet master." The silence in the room grew thick as the weight of my words pressed upon her. I could see her facade beginning to crumble, the desperation in her eyes deepening as she realized there was no escaping the truth this time. "I am sorry, Alex. I truly am," she whispered, but her tone was hollow, an apology that carried no power, no redemption. I stepped back, allowing the file to be her final reckoning. "I invited you in today so that you could witness the consequences of your actions. Your carefully built empire of deception has collapsed. You're left with nothing now, Melissa. No friends, no reputation, no leverage. Just the truth, and that truth is something you'll have to live with every single day." For a long moment, I watched her, seeing in her eyes the dawning realization that her plan had finally unraveled. There was no spark of defiance left, only the raw, exposed fear of someone who has lost everything. I knew then that this was my final victory, not because I relished in revenge, but because I had reclaimed my power and my future from the ruins of what once was our life together. With a measured calm, I concluded, "This is your final moment, Melissa. The morning light may bring new beginnings for some, but for you, it marks the start of a solitary journey with nothing left to hide behind. I hope someday you understand that true strength comes not from manipulating others, but from living honestly, even if that truth is hard to face." Melissa's eyes brimmed with tears, and for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had once deceived me, but as a broken person confronting the full extent of her own making. As she left, the door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the silent study, a symbolic end to an era defined by lies and betrayal. Standing there in the stillness of my home, I felt an unexpected serenity. The chaos of the past was behind me, replaced by a quiet clarity about who I was and who I would become. True victory wasn't about crushing someone else. It was about freeing yourself from the chains of deception and reclaiming your own life. And in that moment, as the remnants of the night's darkness gave way to the new light of day, I knew that I was finally free.